Okay. All right. So we are now in Genesis chapter 21. We left off last time where the Lord visits Sarah, keeps his promise. Isaac is born. And if you remember how old Abraham was when Isaac was born,
100, wasn't he?
100 years old. And Sarah, how old was she?
90.
90 years old. Okay. So just imagine that, a 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman with a little baby now. I got to take care of that. So that's a miracle of miracles. And Isaac is born. He is grown. He's weaned. And then we have this conflict now. If you remember what happened with Hagar and Ishmael, and there was what was going on there in chapter 21. We left off last time.
Sarah wanted Ishmael to be gone so that Isaac would be the only heir.
Yeah, Sarah does send him, but that's not why she wants him gone. That's why the Lord, in a sense, wills it to happen this way. And he says, listen to your wife, because he's not going to be, your son is going to be the heir. But what was Sarah's reason for kicking the slave woman out with her son?
They were making fun of her.
Yeah, they're mocking, looking with absolute derision on Sarah and Isaac. It is somewhat of a funny, and that's part of this scene, is that laughter keeps coming up with Isaac. His name means laughter. Sarah laughs when she gets the news. Everyone laughs at this whole scenario, but Ishmael is not laughing in a good way. It's a mocking, and so he is sent off, and Abraham is concerned, is bothered by that, because Ishmael is his son. But the Lord says, I'll take care of him. He'll become a nation. Send him off, because the important part is it needs to be clear that Isaac is the heir. And so the son of the promise. Otherwise, Ishmael is the one. Ishmael is the firstborn to Abraham. But Isaac is the one. And so Ishmael goes off, and what happens when she's off in the wilderness with Ishmael? Hagar is, you can remember.
She thinks they're just gonna die. She puts him under a bush and then moves away from him so she doesn't have to hear him die.
Yeah, he's a teenager probably at this point, 14 to 16 years old, and but the water's gone and he's dying. And so she puts him under a bush. She can't look at her son. And then the angel of the Lord appears to her. God speaks to her, and so saves the day. And that's the last we hear of Ishmael. And he goes off. His mother finds a wife for him, and that's the end of his story. A nation now is born, and we'll visit the Ishmaelites will come again later on, but we'll be moving away from Ishmael now and back to Abraham. And now we have this interesting interlude here, a story about Abraham and Abimelech. If you remember Abimelech, where we saw him last, what that was about? Remember last time we saw Abimelech? It was a few chapters ago.
He had taken Sarah.
Yeah, he had taken Sarah he pulled a Pharaoh on Abraham, took Sarah, and the Lord basically told him, you're a dead man, and in a dream, and he returns him and said, I didn't touch her, I didn't do anything, I didn't know, I didn't know. And Abraham intercedes for them, and they kind of, there's a connection now. So this time now Abraham returns to Abimelech, and let's just see what it says here and how it goes. So let's start with that, verses 22 to 24. Liz, you want to start us off here and get that for us?
Sure. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of this army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants or with my prosperity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear.
All right, so let's talk about this for a second. There are two characters mentioned here, Abimelech and Phicol, that are speaking to Abraham. If I can get this right here. Abimelech. And who is Abimelech?
King of the
Yeah. Who is the king of? It'll tell us a little later on if you didn't notice. in verse 32, we'll get there in a second. But he
They
is,
were Philistines.
yeah, he's the king of the Philistines. Now, who are the Philistines? Now, when I don't think they were called necessarily the Philistines, but he identifies them. They are the same Philistines that we're dealing with later on. And who are the Philistines in relation to Israel?
Canaanites?
I don't know that and maybe were they Canaanites? I'm not sure if they were or not, but later on we do. Who's the most famous Philistine of all?
Goliath.
Goliath, yeah.
Goliath, right? These are the enemies of Israel. These are not. They've always had this tension with them.
What's amazing, they describe in one part of the scripture that the Philistine cities, yeah, it's all in the direction of Gaza.
Yeah, that's interesting. The place is called Palestine because it's Philistine. It's the same root as Philistine. I think the Romans called it Palestine in a sense as a slight to the Israelites, calling that area Palestine after their enemies, not after the Israelites. So there's always this eternal tension between the Palestinians, the Philistines, and the Israelites. Very interesting. So Abimelech's the king, and Phicol is mentioned. And who is Phicol?
Commander of the army?
He's the commander of the army. Now, just let that sink in for a second. So Abraham is interacting now, not with just two guys. These are the two most powerful men in that land, the king and the commander of the army. And really, those are your two great powers in any nation, especially at that time, is the king, and the only person the king really feared would be the commander of the army. Because if there's going to be a coup and the king's going to be overthrown, it's going to be coming from the commander of the army. Mm-hmm. So these are your two great powers of the land. And they speak to Abraham. And what do they say? So these two greatest powers in the land speak to Abraham, and what do they say?
Because the Lord is strong with him and favors him, he wants them to treat him right, him to treat them fairly.
They're coming up to a nomad who's a stranger in the land, and they're telling him, deal well with us. They're actually acting as if they are the weaker power here. They are speaking. This is how it should have been. Abraham should be the one asking them, please treat me kindly. Please deal well with me. They have all the power in that land, and yet they recognize that God is with Abraham. Now swear to not deal falsely with us and to deal kindly with us. Basically, as we dealt with you, right? So how do you know that? Why is Abimelech and Phicol so? Why do you think they speak this way to Abraham? And it's such a strange way for two most powerful men to speak to a traveling nomad.
Well, God had told Abimelech, "You're a dead man." That's a good start.
I'm sure this is Abimelech. Abimelech knows, has experienced the power of God, and also the favor of God toward Abram. He knows that Abraham has a special in with God, and so he recognizes that, yes, we're powerful, but God can wipe us out any moment. So he deals with, and basically enters into a covenant with Abraham. Abraham swears. And this is really, enters into covenant. All right, let's take a look then at what happens. Now we have this instance here that peculiar one, but let's take a look at this one. 25 down to 20, down to 34. And let's read that. see. Steph, you want to get that for us here?
Sure. Are we there?
Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Are we there though, in the days?
In the days, yes.
In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar.
Wait a minute, is that the wrong one?
Yes.
Oh, no wonder. I always, I hate this. It always does this. It jumps whenever I expand the size of it. It jumps to another passage. So my apologies there, Jack. Sorry.
I thought Jack was speaking in tongues.
Me too.
I'm like, it did look a little odd to me. All right, let's take a look here. But you did a great job there, Jack. I appreciate it. This is a little bit easier.
All
Here we
right.
go. 25.
When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham sent 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I have dug this well. Therefore, the place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarack tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines.
Okay. All right. It's kind of an odd story. It got to have some significance. It's not a very interesting story. It's arguing about a well, but let's take a look at what it says here. So Abraham has a problem. Abraham reproves Abimelech. And what's the issue?
Well,
Someone has taken his well.
Yeah, that's so what happened here is that Abraham dug a well, and Abimelech's servants seized that well. Now, keeping in mind that's a big deal. The amount of effort it takes to
Sorry for the interruption,
yeah, please.
but we're just going to give you a quick one here because he's going back in his crate.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me stop the share for a second so everyone can see. A second. Hold on.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Jack.
Oh.
Okay. It's a little dark.
Look, it's
Hold on a
Tom.
second. I'm trying to stop this.
he's actually better looking than Jack.
Yes, much.
Every picture,
Oh, look at that guy.
his ears are so cute.
Oh.
Look at his
Yeah.
paws. Oh, his paws are brown. Look.
What's his name?
All right. So Abraham digs a well, and it's a big deal. When you think about the amount of effort it takes to dig a well in that time without the kind of equipment that we have today, and also that the desperate need for water in these places when you're not near running water, and it's a very big deal, and battles can be fought over a well. And so for Abraham to dig that well, and then for Abimelech's servants to just come and take it from him, that's quite an offense there. And remember what God had said, that I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. So we'll see what happens here, how Abimelech will respond to that. Abimelech.
I
ahead.
remember some other passage talked about Abraham's well. I never made the connection, but I guess this is what they're talking about, huh?
You think of Jacob's well that he dug?
Oh, Jacob's well. I'm sorry.
Jacob.
You're right. Right, Jacob's well.
Yeah, that was
thinking about
yeah. All right, so Abimelech serves the well, and then he confronts him on this, and what does Abimelech say in response to Abraham's
I didn't
concern.
know anything about it. It's not my fault. Let's
Yeah.
take care of this.
Yeah, Abimelech pleads as and that's not, yeah, knows nothing of it. And that makes sense. He's a king. I mean, it's a well. It's not going to get reported to him. His servants will probably do that all the time. It probably they these armies, they come in and they take what they want. So there's nothing strange about them seizing a well from a citizen. He just didn't realize it was Abraham. Can't have that. So he knows nothing about it. So Abraham then does what? In verse 27. This is, we say he will enter into a covenant, makes a covenant. What does he do?
Get some sheep and oxen.
Yes. So in this setup here, how much does he give him?
It was 7 ewe lambs, but above it, it says oxen, and I didn't see where the oxen.
Is it just ewe lambs? I guess it's just, oh, he took sheep and oxen, gave them.
Yeah, but then down below that, he just says 7 ewe lambs. It doesn't mention the oxen after that.
Abimelech, and they make a covenant, and he set 7 ewe lambs apart.
7's an interesting number.
Yeah. What does the number 7 symbolize typically in the scriptures?
God.
Please.
Yeah, this is God's number of completion, that belonging to God. And so these 7 ewe lambs, so this is perhaps emphasizing this is a covenant before God. And Abimelech, what is the meaning of these 7 lambs? And what is the meaning of the 7 lambs?
It's
So
a
that it
sign.
may be a witness to me that I dug this well. So,
Yeah. So you're going to take these 7 lambs, and that will testify to everyone wondering about this, that I dug this well, and you're accepting them is a validation of that. You're accepting them is telling everybody that this is my well. I dug this well. So it's a sign of this for them. So Abimelech receiving the lambs is a sign that he approves of Abraham's possession of the well. So therefore the place is called Beersheba. What does Beersheba mean?
We made a pact, made a covenant.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Is there a footnote on that?
let me look.
I have one.
It said it in here.
Should say something like that. It's like the,
It says, it was called Bathsheba because both of them swore an oath.
okay, with both of them. But the name itself means something, doesn't it? Is it like the well of oath or something like that? Well of 7? I can't. Does anyone have that note on that? Probably check
No.
that.
Well of 7 or well of the oath.
Yes, there we go. That's what
I
I thought it was.
googled.
Thank you. There you go. Well of 7 or well of the oath. Okay, so Beersheba, which we'll encounter in future stories. So this kind of gives you the beginning of this significant town. All right, so Abraham, and that's the end of Abimelech. Abimelech and Phicol go back to home. Phicol return to the Philistines. And what does Abraham then do?
Planted a tamarisk tree.
Abraham planted a tamarisk tree. I don't know anything about a tamarisk tree. Do you know what that means? What kind of tree that is?
Just the Reformation Study Bible just says the planting of this small tree in the Negev probably serves as a landmark of God's grace, a pledge that Abraham will stay in the land, and perhaps a symbol of God's shading presence. But it doesn't say anything about that particular tree.
Trees are a big deal in the scriptures. In the book of Genesis, if you remember, it was at the wasn't it a tree in Moriah where that, or somewhere that the Lord appears to Abraham at a tree? We have, of course, the trees in the Garden of Eden, the whole trees that start this whole thing off.
Mm.
Trees are throughout. They're symbols of God's grace, his presence, of life, of the fruit of them. So trees are there, and it's at this tree that, but there, it's what he does in that at that tree that is significant. He, once again, he calls.
I Googled again and it says that a tamarisk tree has slender branches and very fine leaves showing the flow of the riches of life. Thus, the tamarisk tree planted by the well of oath in Beersheba pictures the flow of the riches of the life, the issue of the experience of the tree of life.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. So I'll put in parentheses a tree of life, question mark. But he calls in the name of the Lord, and he's speaking, and this time the Lord is referred to as the everlasting God. So this whole idea of eternal life is kind of presented in this passage. And then it concludes with Abraham sojourned where?
In the land of the Philistines for many days.
All right. So this passage is really interesting. If it's in one sense, it's not a very interesting story. It's just a dispute over a well, and they settle it pretty easily. There's no drama or conflict. They're just kind of, okay, fine, didn't know. Okay, we'll take care of it. And he does. But when you look back at how it fits into the narrative, why it's there, I think is significant. First off, let's recall in Genesis chapter 12, God made promises to Abraham. And if you remember the three promises that God made to Abraham, we want to always keep these in mind. What were those three promises?
Make a great nation of you.
Yep, I'm going to make a great nation of you.
And all the world will be blessed through your line.
All nations will be blessed through you. Anyone who blesses you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed.
And land.
And he'll give you the land. Okay. In this passage, you can see there's this, hence, even though he hasn't received it all yet, we can see first God's hand is upon, even the pagan kings are recognizing that God is with him and God is blessing him in all that he does. And they understand, it reminds you that God who blesses you will be blessed. And so Abimelech, understanding that, wants to be a part of the blessing. He was for a moment on the side of the curse when he took Sarah and the Lord was about to kill him. He felt that, and now he wants to be a part of that blessing. And so you see that promise, God being faithful to that. It's also the land. So you have here a moment where, once again, Abraham takes something or owns something in the land, and it's taken from him. As again, God promised him the land, and now he has a well in the land, just a little place, and it's taken from him. But Abraham does what is impossible for any other human being. He reproves a king. Ponder that for a minute. He rebukes a king for what happened to him. And the king is afraid, and attends to it. And Abraham, it's really interesting. This mighty king who is with the commander of his army. And the sense is, if Phichol's there with his army, guess who else is there?
The army.
The army's there, right? The commander of the army is there with the king. I guarantee you the army, or at least a good portion of the army, is there with them right now. Abraham is not in a position of strength, and yet he boldly comes up to the king, reproves him for an injustice that happened with him. And the king is very willing to enter into covenant with him. It's really just showing you the faithfulness of God for this old man, taking care of him. And even when things are taken from him in the land, he gets it right back as always. And that blessing and the everlasting God he calls upon, and this picture of coming, this tree of life, this tamarisk tree where he can call on the name of the Lord, It's a nice, just a little flavor of the fulfillment of God's promises. It's kind of like, I would put it this way, we get tastes of God's promises to us in this world. Just tastes of it, like Abraham does here. So we know the great promises of God to us are, he's going to give us eternal life. He's going to raise our bodies from the dead and perfection. There'll be no more suffering, pain, or death, or mourning, or anything like that. We also know that he is going to bring us together to our home, where we'll experience the love of God with our true family forever and ever and ever. And we know that he's going to make a new heavens and a new earth, and all things are going to be perfect and beautiful. So those are the great promises to us. We haven't experienced them yet, but he gives us tastes of it. And so sometimes we get a taste of that when we experience a physical healing, and we pray and God gives us a taste of the resurrection when he raises us up and heals us in some way. Or we get a taste of the love and the reconciliation that we have forever with our true family when we find forgiveness and peace with one another in this life. Just tastes of it, tastes of his glory. Abraham is getting that here. He's just getting tastes of it. The fullness is coming, but right now it's just a smattering, just a taste. And God is just faithful. It's a simple story, but it really just reminds you of, wow, God keeps his promises, doesn't he? All right, let's see where we are here now. What time is it?
One of my favorite passages in Isaiah, it says, my purpose, Isaiah 46:10 says, my purpose will be established and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. Just when you think it's going to fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a relentless going back to a keeping of the promise. That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is good. And this is, and now we're coming up to Genesis 22, and we're about to come into the Abraham's biggest test of his faith that he will ever have. And of course, this is now the sacrifice of Isaac. This is the greatest test that he will face. But all along the way, the Lord has been caring for him, and he's reminding him, I am with you. I'm with you. And all these different stories we've seen, just building upon another. Abraham's faith is growing. That test God reserves when Abraham's 100 and I believe 114 years old. We're looking, that test that he's about to get in the next chapter is 40 years after the promise was given to him. 40 years, God delivering him again and again, God keeping his promises. And so when it comes now, he's ready for that test. That's important to get, because people are like, gosh, if God ever asked me to do something like that, I could never, ever in a million years, survive a test like that. But that's us who are young in faith. We haven't learned the fullness of how much we can trust God in everything. And over time, that's why he gives us tests that grow and stretch our faith. And oftentimes the biggest tests come at the end. So let's take a look at that. How are we doing on time? I don't want to go to 2:47. We can get into it at least. We'll see how it goes. So Genesis 22. Let's see where we leave off here. Jeff, you want to get this for us? Genesis 22 verses 1 to 8.
1 to 8. Okay, sure. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and knife, so they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together.
Okay. All right. Let's go through this here. So now, God tested Abraham. And let's look at what's kind of test this is. What does he say to him? He's going to start after calling him. What is the test?
Pastor, I find it curious that he says that they will return to him again. The boy and I will come to you again.
Yes. Yes.
So he had faith believing going right into this.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's the point of Hebrews. Hebrews will mention Abraham and say he knew that God could raise him from the dead. So let's take a look at the passage here. So remember, faith is the test of faith that comes out.
Bless you.
It's let's talk about what a test of faith is. A test of faith is when God makes a promise, but the circumstances, the trials that you're in, the trials that we face, seem to contradict the promise and threaten it. So that's a test of faith. And the question is, will you walk by faith, what you've heard, or sight, what you are seeing before you? That's the test of faith. So when God has made a promise of when he says to his disciples, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things that you worry about, the things that you need, will be yours. I will take care of you. What you eat, what you drink, where, I will take care of those things. You seek first the kingdom. That's a promise he makes. But then it comes to a point where you are in a dilemma now. If I stand from my faith and seek first the kingdom, I am going to be fired from my job. Then how will I feed my family? Okay, there's your test of faith now. Do you believe the promise, what God has said, that he will take care of you in whatever way he sees fit? Or are you going by what you're seeing, which is you're going to be fired, and then it looks like you're going to starve and be out on the street and not be able to pay any bills, and everything's going to go down the drain? What do you believe? There's your test of faith. So God tested Abraham. And so before you can really talk about this, to understand this story, you have to begin with, what did God promise to Abraham?
A great nation.
That he would be a great nation.
All the world will be blessed through his offspring.
Yeah. So he would have many offspring, right? But there was now there's more specific promises than that help us interpret this test even more. What else did he say?
When he was told he should send Isaac away,
Ishmael.
Ishmael away, didn't he say that it was because Isaac was the promise was coming through Isaac?
Well, let's go back and see. What does he say? So this is, he says here, God said to Abraham, okay, not be displeased. Morning took bread. Whatever Isaac says to you, do as he tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He told him that, didn't he? So that's 21, just in the last chapter. Now, that last chapter happened about 14 years earlier, but it's still, God had made it clear to him. Let me find my place here. That through Isaac, your offspring will be made. Now, at this point, Abraham knows something then. No matter what happens on this day, Isaac must be alive at the end of this day. It has to be, because God promised that it was be through Isaac that your offspring will be named. If Isaac if Isaac was married and had kids, there's no guarantee that Isaac will be alive. But Isaac is not yet married. Isaac has no kids, and it has to be through him. So Isaac has not fulfilled his purpose yet. So Isaac will be alive at the end of the day. Abraham knows this. And so when God comes and tests him and says, take your son, and he's clear about which son, your only son, Isaac, because at this point, Ishmael is sent away, and he is no longer the heir, no longer the son of Abraham. Isaac is the only son, the heir. And he adds a little bit more to it. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. And he says, go to the land of Moriah, okay, and offer him as a burnt offering. And where should he offer him as a burnt offering?
On the mountain.
On a mountain. But I will tell you, tell you. Okay, so anyone know, by the way, what mountain that was?
That's the Temple Mount.
That's the Temple Mount. It would later become that. It is now the what's there is the Dome of the Rock by the Muslims, that mosque that they have there. And in the Muslim telling of the story, that is the rock that Abraham was about to kill Ishmael, according to the Muslims, on that rock. And so if in the Dome of the Rock, apparently underneath there is a rock that they claim this all happened on. That's where the temple was built. And of course, it is just outside of there. If you remember, they go up on the mountain, and then off in the distance, they see the lamb that God will replace them with. And Christ, of course, is crucified near that place, just as the lamb that God provided. But we'll get to that in a minute. All right, take your only son, Isaac. So he goes off, and just the details are really interesting. What happens here? He gets that news, and so what in verse 3, what does Abraham do?
He gets up and goes, takes what he needs and goes.
Yeah, he rises early in the morning. Get this over with, right? Saddles a donkey. Let's go through the details, make sure we get them all right here. What does he do? So he saddles a donkey, takes 2 young men with him. Adds a little interesting detail. What's the next thing he does?
That's the wood.
He cuts the wood for the offering.
I was going to say he follows God's instructions, and he trusts in him as well through
Yeah.
his action.
Yeah, he does exactly what the Lord requires of him. He trusts him. This is a great picture of trust. It's like you only do that if you trust the Lord, that this is a horrible thing you're asking him to do. It's an evil thing, it seems, you're asking him to do. And yet there's a trust that though the appearance is evil, there is a good in this because it's coming from God. I trust him in that. But there is still an appearance of evil. And Abraham doesn't know what's going to happen. And even if God does raise him from the dead, he has to plunge the knife into his own son.
Mhm.
I mean, that's horrifying. Even if God heals it right away, it's like that he would bring him to that point. And it's like, you have to have this absolute confidence that, okay, I trust the Lord in this. He cuts the wood for the offering and he takes, okay, who carries the wood?
Isaac.
Okay, Isaac carries the wood. And what does Abraham carry? Abraham?
This is after he separates from the other two guys.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's right. After they leave. Oh yeah, we can't skip that. We gotta get to that first. Thank you. So what does verse 5, you mentioned that, Teresa, earlier. What does he say?
I'm sorry, Pastor, but say that again.
Verse 5, you had mentioned that earlier. You made note of that. What does Abraham say to the young men?
That he'll be back. They'll be back.
Yeah, I and the boy will go worship and return.
Pastor, you missed something here. I'm surprised you missed it, that even predicts basically something good coming in verse 4.
On the third day, right?
The third
On
day.
the third day. Thank you. I'm a little, I got it. The dog's
So-
just threw me off
So
here.
according to John theology, there is something good coming. Life.
On the third day. Thank you. We talked about that before. Things happening on the third day. In the scriptures, you'll see this pattern. And let me just pull it out here, so you can see it. That you have the first day is the day of sort of declaration. The second day is sort of the day of waiting. And then the third day is the day of fulfillment. You're going to see that pattern again and again throughout, where you have God in the creation story. We saw that where we have this great declaration, let there be light on the first day. And then the second day, not a lot happens. It's just the separating of the waters from above and the waters below. So this anticipation. And then it's the third day, you have the rising of the land and life appears for the first time. You have it, of course, in the when we talk about Jesus being raised on the third day, you have that. Day one is that Friday when he is put to death and says, it is finished. And then day two is in the tomb, this waiting and anticipating, and it's on the third day he rises. And so there's this pattern here we have as well with Abraham. On the day he's given the command, and then we have this kind of waiting on the second day as they're traveling, and the third day, it's going to happen now. And we'll see what happens. So a day of resurrection for him. So then he declares it. I and the boy will go worship and come back. Isaac carries the wood. What does Abraham carry?
The knife and the fire.
Carries the knife and the fire. Okay. Interesting. All right. And he says to him, Isaac responds. And what does Isaac say?
Where's the lamb?
Yeah. Where's the lamb? And Abraham says,
God will provide it.
God will provide.
Jehovah Jireh.
Yes, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So that's where we're going to leave it off today. Second, so they went both of them together. But you can see some of the foreshadowing here. Does this sound familiar to you? A father takes his son, his only son, whom he loves, brings him up a mountain. The son carries the wood.
Jesus.
The
Jesus.
father holds the knife and brings the fire. Yeah, it's all there. And that it's the Lord, he says, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt off. He will provide the lamb.
Basically, a summary of what the whole Bible's about.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. He's a man of faith. It's just it's an incredible story, and then of course it ends with the resurrection of Isaac, which we'll get to. Well, it's only 3:00. We can keep going. We can finish the story. So let's keep going here. So God will provide for himself the lamb, and let's pick up there and finish up here. Steph, you want to read that for us? Verses 9 down to 14.
Sure. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided.
Okay. All right. So they come to the place, and what does Abraham do? Abraham,
Built the altar.
on the mountain now, he built an altar. Built the altar.
Finds his son.
Before that, he lays the wood
Mm.
and then binds his son.
I can't
And
imagine
let-
Isaac is
Yeah, go
thinking at this moment.
By the way, so in the land of Canaan, particularly, but throughout the ages of pagan idolatry, this was not a strange request from a god.
Right.
They were always doing this. They were always sacrificing their children to their gods. It was a common practice for them to do that. That's how depraved and wicked the place was. And so for the Lord to tell Abraham to take his son and sacrifice him, that doesn't sound strange to the people of the land there. That's what all their gods do. Baal, Molech, they all say, bring your children to me, sacrifice them to me. And so here he lays Isaac on the altar. And again, keeping in mind, Isaac is at this point, he's probably about 13 years old or so. And Abraham is 113 years old. That Isaac was the one who had to carry the wood up the mountain. He's a strapping young man. And Abraham can't carry the wood. He can only handle the knife and the fire. So what's an amazing part of the story is the submission of Isaac.
Yeah.
He lets his father do this. So and you notice he doesn't say a word.
Pastor, can I change the subject for 1 second? You mentioned Moloch. I believe that's where all these aborted babies are. I think that they're all a sacrifice to him. That's my feeling on that, is that they're certainly not for Jesus.
No. That's an interesting comparison, absolutely, because it's so against the way that God made us, especially made women as mothers. You don't. We're the ones who are supposed to be sacrificing for our kids. We don't sacrifice them for us. But that's the devil's work. And these gods are all like that. They're wicked, and they're self-centered, and they're always sacrificing the weak for their own appetites and desires. And that's why people would sacrifice their children, because they wanted to please the gods, to get something for themselves. They wanted the famine to end. They wanted rain for their crops. They wanted something, and they gave them their most valuable possession, which is their future. That's what the children represent, is their future. We're going to give you our future so we can have something right now. It's pretty perverse, yeah, but it's still with us, isn't it? Lays Isaac on the altar. Isaac is a picture of complete submission, like a lamb to the slaughter. I remember hearing stories of shepherds when they would slaughter their sheep, when it was time for that the sheep would be nervous and anxious, and the shepherd would come and sort of speak to them, and the sheep would just completely submit, follow the shepherd, with complete contentment and trust, even though he was about to be killed. Just the lamb. He is like the lamb right now. Abraham, look how far the Lord takes him here, or has him go. He could have stopped him anywhere along the way. But when does he stop Abraham?
Just before he
lifts
takes
the knife.
Isaac's life.
Yeah.
Before.
Abraham reaches out his hand, took the knife, takes the knife to slaughter his son. You can see him. The son is on the altar, bound, and Abraham takes the knife and has it up and ready to plunge. And it's at that point the Lord calls. Now look how the Lord calls to him.
It's amazing. You said he submits, he doesn't fight it. It's not like he said, oh, I'm just foreshadowing Christ, so I'm just going to lay here. He doesn't have any knowledge of that.
No, yeah.
But he submits anyway, without any reason other than he did.
He trusts his father. He just trusts his father. He does,
Yeah.
and he obeys his father. Yeah.
It's like, Abraham, he, for so many years was just so confident and had such saving faith. And, even at that moment of climax, he still remained so cool and could see so clearly what God wanted him to do. There was no confusion. I mean, that's a lesson to all of us, because we might start off strong and then have troubles and waver and question. And he just kept that clarity too, where he could just stop.
Yeah. And he clings to the word, and he knows what God has promised him. He knows after all these years, all the times God has delivered him, and how he's brought him to places that were impossible. Remember the first thing, as soon as he gives him the promise, there's a famine in the land. He has driven from the land. His wife is taken captive by Pharaoh, and all is lost. And then God intervenes and brings it all back. It's like, okay, we've seen this before. Now we're here. And Abraham is just clinging to the word, to the promise he's been given. So important for us as Christians to do that. We have been given promises. We really have. We've been given real promises from God and from Christ. I will never leave you nor forsake you. We can be content, all that you need. If you lack wisdom, ask him, I will give you wisdom. And all the trials you're going through, that God is working them all for your good. For our good. That's what he promised us, that no matter what we're going through, God is working it all for good. And those are the things we have to cling to, because there are moments when it doesn't look like it's good. It looks like everything is out of control, like we've lost everything. But these are our tests of faith that we all have to go through. And you'll never learn to trust God until you've been through these kind of tests of faith, when he's made it look like you've lost what he's promised, and now all you have is his word. He's like, and we cling to that. The Lord calls from heaven now to him. And what does he say? Notice how he calls him.
Abraham.
Abraham,
Abraham.
Abraham. He says it twice. Do you know the significance of repeating the name?
Yeah, sometimes they would do it for emphasis, but it also shows very close kinship, like
Yeah.
Martha, Martha, Peter, Peter. You know, Simon, Simon. I mean, yeah. So
Yeah, it's twice to repeat the name twice is a word of affection to the one you're saying it to. It's a really a beautiful phrase. So even when Moses at the burning bush, a terrifying scene, the Lord calls out to him, Moses, Moses, a word of comfort and affection for him. You don't need to be afraid. Simon, Simon, Saul, Saul, when he appears on the road to Damascus, even Samuel, Samuel. So many times you'll see that. And so here we see it, Abraham, Abraham. He's about to do the unthinkable, and God calls to him. And he says, here I am. Don't lay your hand on the boy. What does he mean? He says, I know that you fear. I mean, doesn't he know that already? God knows
Yes.
everything. What does he mean by that? I know that you fear God.
He was proving,
Yeah, go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
You have faith. You believe me in me.
Yeah, you believe me, but when he says to Abraham, I know that you fear God, but God knows everything.
Mm.
He knows what's in his heart and everything. What is that about? For him to say that, then did he not know before? He wasn't sure of it and needed to test
He
him.
acted on his faith.
I think Abraham needed to see his faith.
Yeah. If you remember in the scriptures, when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, if you recall, the Lord knew the depravity of these people, but he still sent his angels to see what was there before he would bring judgment. So the Lord knows everything, but he exposes things first before he rewards or punishes them. That's important. He knows that there's faith there, but that needs to bear fruit. You know, the point of the apple tree is not to have an apple tree, it's to have apples. And the apple is the evidence of the appleness of that tree. You know, it's always that, and the Lord knows it for sure. And the Lord knows that Abraham believes, and we know that because it was told that before. Remember, Abraham believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. That was something the Lord saw. But now it's like, now we have this test where Abraham's faith is put on display for not just the Lord, and not just for Abraham, but who else is witness to this display of faith?
Isaac.
Isaac witnesses it, right? Anyone else?
The two men with him.
Two men, certainly.
Us.
I think even bigger, us who are reading it today.
Mhm.
We can add to that list all the angels and spiritual beings in the heavenly realms are all seeing these things. Remember that whole thing with Job where Satan comes in and the Lord puts Job through the test as a proof to the heavenly beings here that this is a righteous man. I know that you fear God. And so Abraham's faith is made visible here. So his trust is seen in his obedience. In the most severe trial, we see the depth of this man's faith and conviction.
Sure.
So, all right. So then the Lord will provide. He calls the name. Is it Jehovah Jireh? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Abraham called the place. The Lord will provide. So he sees before we get there. Now Abraham sees the lamb that the Lord provided. Okay. So Abraham sees the Lord's ram now and sacrifices the Lord's lamb. It's a really interesting scene because that's not how offerings work. Offerings work this way. You sacrifice something that belongs to you. That's a real sacrifice. If I sacrifice something that doesn't belong to me, that's not a sacrifice, is it?
Mhm.
But in this act of worship, Abraham is sacrificing what the Lord has provided. And that's what's pleasing to him. Nothing, Abraham was about to make a great sacrifice of his son, who belongs to him, who is his hope and his future, to God. And the Lord will not allow that. And instead, he gives him, this is the Lord's offering. You must give to the Lord what he has provided here. And it really sets forth this idea of how we worship by faith. We're coming to God not with our works, our merits, our sacrifices to gain his favor, but he has provided the sacrifice. And we, in our obedience and faith, are offering up what the Lord has provided already. It's a beautiful picture. It's really profound.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it's a substitute, right? The Lord provided a substitute sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly right. And this will set the tone now for what's to come, for the Passover in Egypt, for the temple sacrifices, all those things. The Lord provides. The Lord provides. And then you also see that, in this scene, which really sets the pattern, which we saw earlier, if you remember in Genesis 3, we had the first shedding of blood. What was the first shedding of blood in the book of Genesis?
Animals.
It was an animal that the Lord took the skins of and clothed Adam and Eve with. And there was a sacrifice that was not provided by Adam and Eve, but by the Lord to clothe them. Here we have it again. And so therefore now all those temple sacrifices, they're not going to suffice, not just because they're animals, but because there are animals. There are sacrifices we're bringing up, and that's not going to work. It has to be the Lord's sacrifice. It has to be the Lamb of God, not our lambs, but his lamb that will provide for us. So, right.
Now,
Well, let's
question. You mentioned that the Muslims, their story was Abraham the place where he was going to sacrifice Ishmael.
Yeah.
Now, that's interesting because the story in the scripture is Isaac. I don't know, it's just interesting. It strikes me.
Yeah, no, that's the Islam. The Muslims would say that, look, we believe in the Bible, even in the Gospels, but your Gospels and Bible have been perverted. And the Quran is the correction to that. The Quran is the what really happened. And so you thought it was Isaac that was sacrificed. It's not. It's Ishmael, because Ishmael is the one who is the firstborn son, and we are the children of Ishmael. So, and then in the New Testament, for example, you said that Jesus was crucified. No, he was not crucified. They did not kill him. He did not die that way. And some even suggest that it was Judas, or some say that they may have put him on the cross, but they didn't kill him. So so there is a correction. And one of the corrections is that Ishmael is a centerpiece for them, as opposed to Isaac. Yeah. So
As to this ram here with Abraham is another connection to Jesus, because the Lord provided Jesus as he provided this lamb, ram.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can see it. It's like, it should have been Isaac that had died, and the Lord gives him a substitute. And Abraham said,
it should have been us that paid for the sins.
Yeah.
But he gave us a substitute.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so that's what the sacrifices of so the difference between pagan sacrifices and the Jewish and the Christian, the biblical sacrifices, is that in pagan sacrifices, you are coming to God, or to your God, seeking a blessing, and you're going to offer up a sacrifice from yourself to feed that God. So that God needs your sacrifice. It needs for strength. And so these gods, they cannot feed themselves. And so we bring a sacrifice to our God that gives him strength and makes him favorably disposed to us, and he'll give us what we ask. That's the hope. It's a quid pro quo. We give you a sacrifice, you give us a blessing. But in the Bible, what you see is, no, it's the sacrifices are, first, the blessing comes first. He's blessed us. He's already blessed us by his word. He already blessed Abraham. And the sacrifice is a response to that of faith. But also when these sacrifices are commanded in these feasts, there are these special sacrifices that are substitutes that bear the punishment that we deserve in our place, enable us to be forgiven and to remain in a place of grace with God. So that's why in the New Testament, what you see is there are no more blood sacrifices, but the Bible talks about there are sacrifices. There's a sacrifice of Christ for our sins, but there are other sacrifices that we do offer, the sacrifice of praise in Hebrews, and the sacrifice of good works, the love that we show for one another, the praise that we offer to him, the thanksgiving. These are also part of our worship here. So in Abraham's going to the Lord, obeying him, he's going to worship him, and he's going to give back to the Lord what the Lord has given to him. That was his intent. And then the Lord says that was a test. What it really is I will provide the ram for you. And now then the Lord even pledges further, his promise will surely come true. He just resounds, and that's going to be the end of Abraham's story in a minute. But let's break here. I want to come back to the story again next week. It's such a great story. We'll finish it up again then.
Good.
So.
Thank you, Pastor Michael. I apologize for the dog. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay.
I was gonna say, the only thing that I wondered was,